Hello, I'm Jonathan, and this is the Doppelstutzen for Grenzscharfschützen model 1795. I apologise for butchering the German language there. This is not German, but Austrian, and right away I want to show you the muzzle, or muzzles, because this is a double-barrelled weapon. Not uncommon in history, of course, but somewhat uncommon to have one barrel rifled and one barrel smoothbore. Flintlock mechanisms, of course, quite robust, chunky, workmanlike, you might say, and one lock per barrel, which is the easiest way to do multiple shots with a flintlock. Not like the Belton that we did a while back, where you had 7 shots and one lock, and the lock kind of gave up after the first shot. These stay with it the whole way. The barrels are, of course, over and under configuration. The locks clearly aren't, because it's much more convenient to have them set up left and right like this. The overall configuration is Jaeger-style rifle, including this sort of trigger guard affected semi-pistol grip. Well, not really a pistol grip, but this style. Of course, the British take, famous British take on the Jaeger rifle is the Baker. Very similar silhouette, except for that it's much chunkier because it has 2 barrels. Cheek piece formed into the buttstock there. Patch box at the back for patches, potentially storing tools in. There isn't anything in this one, unfortunately. While we're at the back, there's just to point out that it wasn't just the armories semi-permanently marking objects. There is the rather obtrusive stamp of the Royal Artillery Museum, formerly at the Rotunda. They stamped this into absolutely everything. But back to the main story, as it were. So the barrels are octagonal, as you can see. We are missing a nose cap or an end cap there, made of brass. We'll have a link or several links in the description to sources. There's an earlier pattern of this, the 1768 pattern, which was the first original pattern to be introduced. I don't believe the nose cap changed. You can see that on that one that we'll link, that was sold through Holt's some years ago. And our good friend Balash at the Cap and Ball channel actually got hold of that and presented it at a show he was at. So check that out. And also some of the other sources. This is really quite interesting. I suppose the other thing to say about the barrels is they're very short. This is really certainly what the British would have called a carbine. Very short barrels for a military weapon, for an infantry weapon, I should say, and even for a rifle. And they're short because this thing is extremely heavy, I think. They have redacted the barrel length, so it's still long enough to do the job out to the distance required, but it means it's not too insanely heavy to carry around. Weight-wise, this is 5.38 kilos, slightly lighter than, I think, 5.5 kilos of the 1768 pattern. So this is the 1795 pattern. And that was achieved by slimming the stock down and slimming the lock plates down, I believe. It's not a huge difference, but there is a difference. Other differences, the earlier pattern that I've seen had a space for the rammer on the stock, down the side. This doesn't have that, and the literature talks about a separate rammer that was carried by the rifleman, by the sharpshooter, that wasn't on the weapon itself, and that must apply to this version, I guess. The locks did change as well, so in common with all the other Austrian Empire, or Habsburg Empire, arms of the period, around this time, 1795, they moved from the swan neck cock to the ring neck cock, which is stronger. The Brits do the same thing in 1810. And the pans, which were faceted iron or steel pans, here are replaced by brass for presumably corrosion inhibition, and they're a rounded pattern. So those are the 2 main changes there. The bores are both, in theory, 14.8 millimeters in caliber. Obviously, the rifling grooves, 7 right-hand twist rifling grooves, go deeper than that because that's how grooves work, but the actual bore of each is supposed to be identical. Sighting provision, we have a brass blade style foresight there, which can be drifted left and right for windage adjustment, no elevation adjustment, which is pretty standard for the time. The rear sight, we've got a open sort of V notch there, and then a flip up, which is very stiff, so I'll just flip the whole gun up to show you that. And I don't know what the second notch is zeroed to, as it were, but the rear one, I believe, is 150 Schritt, which is Austrian paces, which is directly equivalent to the British pace of the time, which is about 105 meters. And then flipping this up, I'll see if I can do it. Oh, there we go. Effectively drops your front sight down slightly. So we could perhaps work out what the two sight calibrations actually are on that. We have a maker's name on the barrel behind the sights there. Very abbreviated. I haven't yet been able to work out who that is, but I'll continue to try. And if I figure it out, we will put it on the screen for you. These, I've seen at least 3 different makers named on these. This is, as I say, this one's a bit of a mystery at the moment. So on the face of it, what we have here is the capability to shoot out to maybe 100 yards or 100 meters with our smoothbore barrel. Because although these are carbine, this is a carbine length weapon, the barrels are still something like 26 inches long, so still capable of doing that, especially if they're precision reamed and they have front and rear sights and a skilled shooter behind the trigger. So eminently capable of that 100-meter range for the smoothbore barrel, I would say, and of course musket reloading speeds. 3 rounds per minute, that sort of thing. And then on the rifled barrel, obviously more precision potential there, and that's recorded as being out to 300, or believed to be about 300 Schritt capability. So that is 246 yards is the figure that's stuck in my head. And I dare say out longer than that, with enough skill and maybe a bit of luck, and if it's not too windy, a day. The trouble, of course, with rifling, you're going to be loading a ball that has to fit into the grooves as you ram it down. Makes it very slow, famously. This is why the Minié rifle of later on is such a big deal, because you get musket reloading speeds with rifle precision. While at this time, a bit like the British Baker, you're having to really jam that bit of lead down there and rely on a patch to create that tight fit. It's not the lead per se that you're jamming into the grooves, it's going to be a patch of some sort. But it's still slow. That doesn't speed things up very much. It just means that the bullet isn't damaged in the process, hopefully. So again, on the face of it, you're thinking, well, hang on, why didn't they just do what the Brits did with cartridge with a sub-caliber bullet for fighting in line and patched balls of a suitable diameter with minimal windage, or no windage, to shoot with the rifled barrel? Well, I think the answer is that the purpose was somewhat different. This wasn't the case of your fancy new rifleman needing to line up with the guys in red and fire in a linear format, shoulder to shoulder, with a certain amount of regularity. It was more about how these guys fought. Who are these guys? Well, Grenzscharfschützen refers to the GRENZE. So these guys are border guards for the Austrian / Habsburg. It's not technically the Austrian Empire until I think 1806. So it's the Habsburg monarchy, the Habsburg Empire, but it's the Austrians and their territory that they are protecting. So they would recruit local guys wherever they might be. So Slavonia and Croatia are probably the best known, if anyone knows about this, which I didn't until I started researching it. They're the sort of ethnic groups that you're probably going to hear about the most, but also Romanians or Wallachians and Seclers. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And that always makes me think of Dracula, because weird pivot into fiction there for a moment, but he proclaims himself to be a Secli, so a Hungarian ethnic group in that region. And it kind of runs counter to this idea that he was somehow definitely based on Vlad the Impaler.
We, Draculs, have a right to be proud. What devil or witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood flows in these veins?
But anyway, we're getting off piece there. So that was, depending on which part of the border you were on, you might have Romanians and settlers on one side of the map, and then on the rest it's going to be Croatians, Slovenians. So Slavonia is parts of modern-day Croatia and Serbia. So it's that sort of area. And of course, Croatia is still Croatia, albeit, yeah. We won't get into borders and politics over that. But these are the guys we're talking about. So they're recruited locally, and a significant contingent in each regiment, 200 and something, of sharpshooters, Scharfschützen. So they are issued. Well, there's some speculation that not enough of these were made to equip all of them in the first place. So some of them might have had other types of Jaeger rifle anyway, but the majority were equipped with this interesting double, almost call it a musket/rifle, but not a rifle musket. That's something else. And actually, the tactical idea here was to have the smoothbore barrel loaded at all times. Well, you'd have both of them loaded at all times if you're expecting combat, of course, but to have the smoothbore barrel in reserve. So if the enemy gets too close, maybe you're surprised by cavalry scouts or something, you have two shots. It's about increasing the firepower. It's not about switching roles between line infantry and light infantry. It's organic firepower, if I can put it that way. Sounds a bit pretentious. So, of course, their primary role, sharpshooting out to 300 paces, but then they've got this ability to defend themselves with the bottom barrel, or maybe just use it if the enemy are close enough to then keep the rifle bore in reserve. Quite an interesting approach. Quite an odd approach when you think how heavy this thing was, but they're also issued with a shooting rest, bit like the old 17th century musketeers to rest this thing on, and the rest doubles as a lance. I kind of wish we had one of those. I haven't found one in my searches. Maybe Balash at Cap and Ball knows of one. I suspect there's one in a castle somewhere. And they had 3 different positions on this. So it's a monopod, essentially. 3 different positions for a hook to rest the gun into. So you're sort of shooting off this rest for additional accuracy, but your rest is also a very stout staff weapon with a steel tip and an iron shoe on the other end. So they've got a self-defense weapon that's also a tool. And according to the sources I found, although not one of the depictions that I found, they're also carrying a standard Fusilier's saber. So they have a rifle that's also a musket, a half pike essentially, or a lance, very short lance, and a sword. So they're kind of armed to the teeth, these guys, which is interesting. Another thing we don't have to go with this, unfortunately, is the leather sort of shooting case that they carried them around in, which included accessories and ammunition. So they had 40 rounds in cartridge and 70 bullets with measured charges, some of which were apparently in a brass sort of charger, or bandolier as we would have called them in the 17th century in Britain, so that they can patched balls with a separate powder charge. So speeding things up, but not to the point where you're compromising your accuracy. So these guys are tooled up, armed to the teeth, and they're also, the advantage there, of course, is you're keeping the weapon on march, in particular, away from dirt, away from the rain, all that kind of thing. Something that would have been done, for the most part, with an action cover, maybe a muzzle cover, the sorts of things that don't really survive today, and of course just keeping the weapon clean. But these guys had a sort of hold-all, like a sniper's hold-all almost, to store all of their stuff in. And despite the heft, this thing, it really is quite nicely balanced. And I mean, we look at some of the modern rifles that we have that are really quite hefty, because we're building additional capability onto designs that already exist. This thing has been designed from the ground up to maximise accuracy and keep it as light as possible, and they've lightened it again in 1795. So actually, you'd think this would be a bit clunky, but I think it would work well, especially if you have a rest for it. So 40 years in theory of production, only saw 2,500 of these things being made. So they are, as Holtz put it, it might have been about the earlier variant, might have been about the whole thing, the rarest of the Jaeger type rifles for collectors. So we are actually quite fortunate to have one of these in the collection. They seem to have been phased out around 1815. I found one reference to a Seckler regiment that handed theirs in 1815, and they were replaced by the model 1796 Jägerstutzen, conventional rifle. So this little bit of an experiment, albeit quite a long experiment, or maybe the threat at the borders was seen to be less. But a really interesting type of unit, quite mobile, reaction forces, I guess, really quite a little bit different to the way that riflemen were used in sort of expeditionary armies. Thanks so much for watching, guys. As always, remember the YouTube things, like, subscribe if you're not already. We do have a rather exciting exhibition coming up, 28th of June. It's Gladiators, Heroes of the Colosseum. You won't see many guns, but you will see some cool stuff. That's on for 6 months. Come and visit us if you can to see that. Otherwise, we'll see you here again next week.